I see it all go pro. You really can't copy the mojo. Whole twist like Infinity Ocho. These quotes go hard, I got flows by the boatload. We both know I put the game in a chokehold. Can't nobody dodge the process, that's a no-no. Yeah, and every time I look in the mirror, I see the man that I always hoped I would be when I'm grown. Every time that I trust in my intuition, I feel it pulling closer like a king to his throne. So leave me alone. Leave me alone. Just leave me alone. Leave me alone. I see them talking like, everybody talking right.
Yeah. What up? Applause for that. Applause. Hey! How we doing, y'all? Bring this volume down. What's the deal, yo? Applause. It is June 25th, 2025, and I believe it's episode 130 of the How Billy Sees It show. Hell yeah.
So good and tasty.
I've been wanting to press that one for a bit. What's good, y'all? I took a break. I haven't been on for a while. A break from this show, but I've been on other shows, as you know. I've been on Hot Mic with my lovely wife, Sheba. You guys have been catching that. It's been getting some good traction, too. We're going to keep moving with that. We do that every Sunday, and then we put out some reels, the short versions of it, twice for the rest of the week. And so I took a break from How Billy Sees It, but I've been doing that. I've been, I've been creating. I've been working on some music. I've been thinking and contemplating and, living my life here with my wife and doing our thing. Things are so wild. The title of this is has to do with Zohran. So Zohran Mamdani, our new Democratic nominee for the mayor of New York. Typically, the Democrats win, so there's a lot of there's a strong sense that he'll be the next mayor, and so there's a lot going on with that. Applause for Zohran, by the way. Applause for him. It was a very interesting campaign. It was very young and different and rich and fun, and he was all over the place, all over social media. Whoever they had creatively back there did a great job. With their different high energy reels and videos they did for him, and really presented him in a really positive light, like a young and refreshing face. Very different from these clowns, right? Very different from Eric Adams. Very different from Cuomo. These old guard goobers, these terrible people, Cuomo somehow, it's so nutty, when we did a clip on Hot Mic where Zohran was in a debate with the other candidates, and they all were sort of chastising him because he didn't quickly and immediately say that he would visit Israel. And as soon as he gets signed in, he's like, where are you going to visit when you become mayor? And you'd think they would say one of the boroughs. You'd think that all the candidates would pick some borough or some cool, fun restaurant, like make it an interesting statement about the city that they love and that they represent. And instead, so many of them said, I'm going to go to Israel first. And Zohran said he'd go to New York. He's just so refreshing. And when people follow up with that, even when he was on, Colbert, and they asked a similar question about Israel again, his ability to answer the question accurately, succinctly, and to navigate this thing where typically there's just, this quick fealty, and the candidates know that they say the few good appropriate words and they leave. So for instance, Zohran will say, I believe Israel has the right to exist, and I believe they have to abide by international law. What an awesome additional sentence there that a lot of the other candidates won't even attempt. What an obvious thing that's necessary to say if we're talking about nation states at all. We're talking about nation states in the middle of a clear and obvious genocide. We've got war criminals visiting our country from the state of Israel to assert, fine, if you want to assert its right to exist, surely it also, like all states, have a commitment and a responsibility to use their power appropriately and to abide by international law. But somehow that's a big fuss. People have been really ruffled by some of these, his ability to speak well and to speak accurately and to speak truthfully. It's just nutty, yo. But we're happy that he's made it. But some of the, now that he's won, or at least he's won the primary, at least this level of it, the response online is nutty. I want to go to like share real quick, so I'll share this. Let me go to the split screen one. I'm on Twitter. Listen, try not to go on Twitter first and foremost. I'll admit that I shouldn't even be on here, but it is it's such a hodgepodge of terrible people, all trying to be seen, all trying to say their cutest little takes, Matt Walsh is a well-known clown. Matt Walsh says, the fact that a foreign socialist even has a chance to be elected mayor of New York City proves that the voters in our major cities are essentially suicidal. They want to see their own communities destroyed. It's a spiritual and mental sickness. I don't think there's any way to fix it. And unfortunately, someone like Matt Walsh, 72K likes on that. This mediocre, goofy loser, this talentless hack who would not be known at all if it weren't for his ability to navigate the confusing and difficult challenges around gender and the gender discourse and non-binary discourse. He and his asshole buddies at the Daily Wire pose as journalists and manage to make a name for themselves by being the public champions for critiquing the discourse on gender. Critiquing even the discourse, not critiquing gender, critiquing the evolving discourse on what gender is and what it means and how it operates in our lives and in our society. That they took the white male, cisgender, heteronormative position and planted a flag in the ground and became very angry and mocking at anybody who so now he has a platform. So 72,000, and what I want to point to here is because my thing is linguistics, so I'm always going to come back to just the way people frame our conversations. Zohran Mamdani is a very interesting individual. I don't know his full life story, frankly, but the little that I do know, he brings something very different to the New York mayoral candidate race, and he's something different. And he's not just the fact that a foreign socialist. You see, these words are on platforms like Twitter. These words just are used loosely, and they're thrown out. He knows that foreign is a buzzword for his crowd. He knows that socialist is a buzzword for his crowd, and so he throws those two words as if either of those are pejoratives. Neither of them are pejoratives. Neither of them are insults, but he uses them as such. And then he gets the desired effect. He gets 9,000 people retweeted his drivel. Underneath him, I don't know who this person is. See, I'm not even following these people. Am I following this guy? No. Okay. But they're just on my top of my homepage. Moshe says Zohran Mamdani will absolutely move to shut down every single synagogue and Jewish non-for-profit in New York City. Wow. Really? He knows this because in the assembly he sponsored a bill that would do that in New York State. Now I gotta think, is that? Oh my God. This propaganda, I'm sure. So he's got something to Not on Our Dime Act. Like, I would Google that right now, but I actually have quite a lot I want to say in this show today. And I'm not going to go down these rabbit holes with these clowns. But I'm very doubtful that this is a true statement here. This is just another absurd claim from an absurd group of clowns who are all really on their back, on their back foot right now. They're all on their heels, reeling from the realization that all that money they spent, $250 million or more, all the crazy Zionist lies and propaganda, everything from attacking him as some sort of an outsider, some sort of a foreigner, a dangerous person. Language like jihadist. People are using the word jihadist to describe this man simply because he's brown and because he's Muslim. On what metrics do you call this man jihadist other than the color of his skin and his religion? And yet these people have the opportunity to use their voices and to create, to use words and to craft stories. Some of the stories are claiming that Jews are unsafe. The claim is obviously if what this man says is true, if we're shutting down every single synagogue and Jewish, I mean, I really hope that things go forward and he becomes president. I want to see, can we look back and what will Moshe Hill say when this proves itself to be completely untrue, right? He won't say anything. He'll just move on. He'll be on to the next grift. He'll be on to the next crybaby set of nonsense lies that he's trying to say, whatever the political moment needs. All these people just trying to be famous, trying to get a viral tweet going. Javon Price is a well-known kind of Republican dude. He says anti-American Zohran Mamdani became a U.S. citizen only 7 years ago and is now well on his way to becoming mayor of America's largest city. If that doesn't concern you, you're part of the problem. What is the concern? Anti-American. Oh yeah, if he's anti-American, well, on what metrics is he anti-American? In the same energy, the same vein as I said before, these people who call him a jihadist. I mean, just absurd stuff. Anti-American. What metrics would make you say that? There are none. He's simply using words, crafting stories, and he became a U.S. citizen 7 years ago. So what if he became a citizen 7 years ago? What is the problem with that? He immediately frames that as a negative thing. And of course, and I see this, there's a lot of coordination now. A lot of the right-wing media, they're all coordinated still on this, the anti-immigrant stuff. And so Zohran Mamdani is himself an immigrant that needs to be denounced. And the fact that he won is a testament to the fact that there are too many immigrants in New York as well. And they've got this whole concocted story about the Democrats, and the Democrats are flying in and shipping in all these immigrants to get the votes so they can win, you know?
Perfect.
And that's what Twitter is. Now, Charlie Kirk, one of the biggest idiots. New York City is likely to elect a Muslim socialist as mayor. This is quickly becoming one of the biggest threats to our country. Pay attention. Racist, vile stuff. Muslim socialist. In this context, pejoratives, two pejorative labels, when in fact neither of them are that. They may be statements of fact. They may be two words that point to something, and they're part of a broader truth. That is what Zohran Mamdani is and what his campaign is and what he stands for. And if you want to kind of understand more about him, just watch his stuff, go to his website, you know, see the different bits of content he's created. And yes, I think though, you know, he's also hasn't been in politics for decades and decades. This is a good thing. You see, whatever story you want, you can concoct. You know, when Trump is a newcomer to the political scene, he's fresh and he's outside of that. He's not a swamp. He's not a zombie swamper. And they concoct it into a positive. But when they want, they concoct it into a negative. I'm deeply fascinated by this. I think that, you know, we don't do enough of a job of looking at the meta conversation. Like, what is driving the conversation? The conversation is just these words. You pay attention, it's a threat. All these clowns and idiots. Let me see if I can find a few more. There was one guy, David Frum, said something horrendous I saw earlier today. David Frum is considered a reasonable and smart, even useful political analyst for some reason. Yet he posts a lot of garbage, including, where is this? Where is it? Oh yeah, well, at least we can retire that faded and false line. Anti-Semitism has no place in New York City. On what grounds, what metrics are you using to assume that Zohran Mamdani is engaged in any kind of anti-Semitism? Of course, what they've done, though, is they've laid the ground for this over some time, right? Over the last 2 years, we've seen it more forcefully and more directly and more obviously, but this is decades in the making. But no, in the last 2 years, they've made it incredibly absurd, where the word anti-Semitism is without meaning. They're using a definition that includes any kind of speech or any sort of position that would stand in opposition to a nation state, a government, a regime. Notice that they don't use words like regime to describe Israel. They don't use words like regime to describe our country. Regime is a word you use when you want to talk about despots and you want to talk about bad people. Government is a word when you want to talk about good people. Oh, this is a good government. Oh, this is a government. Applause for that. But Frum says we can retire that faded line. And he's implying that anti-Semitism does have a place in New York City. I've seen this across Twitter today. People are talking about how Jews are unsafe and they need to leave. Everyone's going to be leaving the city. What a terrible thing. On what grounds? It's entirely just divisive fear-mongering and nonsense. And I saw someone talk about an intifada. There's an intifada in New York now. You know, and there's nothing about Zohran Mamdani that would imply any of that. Like, the man, you know, it's just absolutely absurd. And so, look, I've been into language, as I've said. I've been into this media stuff. I've been talking about that. I've got lots of content about the need for us to transition away from the cable news, media broadcast sources of information, and for us to step into our own, that the technologies now, Twitter included, allow us the opportunity to share our own ideas and our own experience, and for us to wrest that power away from the cable news, from the legacy media, right? This is a transition that we're going through. While before they had more control, it was bottleneck information, bottleneck narratives, bottleneck the root assumptions, so that they had control all the way through of people's, like, they would have been able to shit on. Zohran wouldn't have been able to get his message out if it wasn't for the social media. He wouldn't have been able to present himself as himself. He would have been subject merely to a couple of minutes when, you know, CNN or Fox or MSNBC wants to look at him and to analyze him and to narrowly describe him the way that these people are. Use words like Muslim and socialist, and you know, end the conversation with this kind of thing. So what the internet age does is it actually gives us the opportunity. We've exploded the number of perspectives. The number of perspectives have ranged incredibly now. They are entirely different from the way that, like, I grew up. You know, the amount of perspectives we're receiving is kind of overwhelming. If you think about it, you think about your parents. Our parents used to, if you talk to them, they'll tell you they used to sit by a radio. The radio guy would come on, and he'd come on, once a week or something, and they would sit by the radio and listen to this white man say what's going on in the world. And of course, this guy and his team, and through the radio, a couple of radio stations, they weren't telling you what was going on in the world. They were picking things. They each had a lens about what was important, and they picked what was important and what they thought people would want to hear. Obviously, today the power and the pull of ratings is much stronger than it was back then. We're talking about, like, the infancy of radio. There was literally people choosing to produce content that they I guess what they thought people wanted to hear, but it was also it was them. Today it's a very mixed concoction of you know, producers and people creating the content, and then this, like, driver from the viewing audience, which is what Fox News is. You know, Fox News produces content for its audience. Fox News is not news. Fox News is not journalism. Fox News produces content for its audience. It is entertainment. I've already talked about this. I've done a thing already. Fox News has they paid, not only have they paid nearly $1 billion in damages for lying on air, but in the court cases, when they had to pay those damages, they argued that they weren't news. That was their argument. They said, look, we're not news. One of the arguments they said for the Tucker Carlson show was that they said, look, a discerning viewer, what do they say? A discerning viewer knows the difference. They know Tucker will switch between a serious look and a more playful face. And when he's doing a playful face, he's not serious and all that stuff. It's entertainment. And so what we have now, and this is the difficult thing, we're transitioning into this new phase where we all have this technology where each of us can reach thousands of people. Some of us can reach millions. And you have the power of a massive, like what radio stations in the past would have dreamed about. There are some radio stations in the present. There are some TV channels now, CNN, their ratings, and MSNBC as well. Like some of these, they pale in comparison to an individual like a Joe Rogan. They pale in comparison to not just Joe Rogan, but lots of people who aren't even political like that. Other people who are simply out there talking, and the challenge is that when it comes to figuring out what's true, we need to be grounded in a set of principles about what is true. We need to be grounded in an ability to see ourselves. If I'm typing out something, I need to be able to be aware of my biases. Some of the old school media, like the old school journalism school techniques are viable and useful and needs to be used on our level now. There is a framework for good journalism that exists. It just wasn't used by the cable news people. But instead, we're in a world now where, let me get off this David Frum thing. We're in a world now where I had serious concerns about Assemblyman Mamdani before yesterday, and that is one of the reasons I endorsed his opponent. Those concerns remain. Okay, I don't even know. If you voted for him, please don't move into any of the red states when you decide to escape. I don't know, man. It's just, let me go to full screen real quick. We're just in a phase where it's different. In some ways it's worse. In some ways it's much better. The potential is much greater in this internet age. But we are poorly trained. We don't have the proper frameworks. The culture from the previous journalism people, from the top elites, wasn't one that taught us and trained us to be well versed and interested in giving appropriate language to truth. It was about being seen. It's about competing against the different news stations. And now that's been spread out to thousands and thousands of people who all try to be seen. So one of the things that's nutty about this moment is to call Zohran Mamdani a jihadist is absurd. It's dangerous. Donald Trump Jr., son of the president, clown, national clown, he tweeted something likening Zohran Mamdani's election win to 9/11. New York City is down. It's just like 9/11. Of course, New York City's gone through different tragedies and difficulties, but 9/11 has a specific thing because of the Muslim connection. Of course, that's there. Of course, he's doing that on purpose. That got something like 100,000 shares and likes on Twitter. Where are the adults? Why don't we have any adults? It's just gonna continue to fracture us with this stupid tendency towards the effort to try to be bombastic and try to say the most absurd thing. These guys who all pretend to be independent thinkers and men, people that we should respect, but all they do is they look out into the world and cry for attention. I think it's embarrassing. I think it's embarrassing. If you want to understand anything, you have to go deeply into it. If you want to understand Zohran Mamdani, spend some time doing that. There's actual real ways to do that. What you don't do, and I see these guys they'll take a Fox News segment and then analyze the Fox News segment on YouTube. You're watching a Fox News segment, which is already compromised bullshit, which is entertainment, with the goal of getting people riled up, with a tone and a style of you know what I'm saying? They're just screaming at each other and saying buzzwords. And then the guys go on YouTube, they take that clip, they watch it, and then they do a little half-hour segment where they mimic that same energy They use the same words to describe Zohran Mamdani again. You know, jihadist, Muslim, socialist. I'm very fascinated in underneath the content. Underneath the content, and I didn't know this as a kid. As a kid, I would watch the news. I would watch TV, particularly the news. My mom made us watch the news. She was serious about that. I appreciate her for that. We watch CNN quite often, frankly. You watch and you assume that you're watching professional adults having a high quality conversation, using the best language to describe the phenomena in the world. And you don't realize that underneath that content, underneath every word being chosen, both on television and in print on the website, and if there was any newspaper and in print there, underneath those words, there's a massive set of phenomena that's at play, that's affecting the word choices, that's affecting the content creators who are creating that content. And that's super valid and important. It's not inconsequential. It's not something to be discarded or ignored, or no, it doesn't matter so much. When you read the word socialist used in a pejorative sense, you are several times more likely to use the word socialist in a pejorative sense. If we're talking about the Israeli genocide at this moment, if you use the word and you read something or you watch a show where the guy is using the word conflict to describe it, it's a conflict. Then you're not getting a proper sense of what's going on. A conflict doesn't engage with what's going on. It's a word. Even the word genocide doesn't do it. Genocide is simply a word. It's a collection of letters. But the reason that word is important, the reason that serious journalists are using that word, is because the word was created in the wake of the last big World War II genocide. It was in the post-World War II world. The word was created to encapsulate a series of crimes, and it was created for us to use it when we notice it, when we notice the signs toward it, even because the word was designed to catch the act before it happens. It was designed to neutralize the possibility of doing what Israel's doing, which is to present itself as the victim. It's designed to make sure that we know exactly who the victim and the offender is, so that that can't be pulled off, so that they can't do that. And it's designed to then trigger a bunch of requirements of the different nation states around the world. This was the mythology that I grew up on. I have a degree in ethics and international relations from American University. This was the mythology that I was taught in grad school about the nature of our international institutions. So you see all this time, and you've seen for the past year and a half this effort to avoid the use of that word. In fact, if you use that word, try to say you're anti-Semitic. You're anti-Semitic. Because to use that word, it turns all of the arguments on its face. Once you accept that truth of what's going on, you can no longer accept the fraud, the phony idea that Benjamin Netanyahu is a victim in any way. And you can't accept the idea that Trump bombed Yemen when Yemen was infiltrating and stopping ships, particularly Israeli ships, that this was some form of terrorism. In fact, they were responding to the terrorism. You see how important the language is? There are people, millions of people, who are receiving an entirely different story about reality, and the words are entirely flipped. The victims are flipped. The perpetrators are flipped. The acts that are good and positive and peace-oriented are flipped. People are rooting against all kinds of things. Why? Because they're receiving information filtered through people who are performing a role, you know. The cable news thing in particular, but the people on Twitter, it's a little bit more complicated, right? People on Twitter are themselves. They can proudly assert their biases. They have that right, you know. It's a little different. It's a little bit more complicated. But for those people, I say, if you're not grounded in humanity, I think you're a loser. I think you're a clown. If you're grounded in like symbols and nationalism, you associate with an identity rather than with the human race. If your association with a particular identity and a particular government, I don't care if it's the American government or the Israeli government or the Belarusian government, or if that affiliation doesn't precludes that precludes your ability to see wrongdoing, then you're a clown. I was raised that way. We read about Germans in the 30s. We read about what they did. We read about the government and the people and how docile and obedient they were, and how they let people get snatched up and carted off to be murdered. We were taught that the appropriate behavior in that time was to disrupt and to call things out and to not comply. The appropriate behavior is to not support the government, not support the murders. We were taught that it's not okay to say that I'm just doing my job either. That's not okay, that people were actually tried after for that that's not a good response or reply. We were taught to dislike Goebbels. I know his name. We were taught about this horrific genocide in Europe with deeper ferocity and seriousness than we were taught the crimes that occurred in this country. We were taught that it's not okay to propagandize ourselves into mass murder. So I stand there, I would hope that the people on Twitter, whatever they're doing, whatever their incentives and their benefits, whatever calculation they've come up with, that they can too be grounded in humanity. But I can see that we're not there. We're certainly not there yet. Applause for that. We're not there yet. I'm gonna go off into language for a little bit. When you receive information from a journalist, you're receiving it secondhand, sometimes third, fourth hand. That journalist, you hope maybe that they had a first-hand experience, but sometimes they didn't. They read something. That maybe they called the person who wrote the thing that they read. Maybe they didn't. In today's journalism, they didn't. They saw something in another newspaper, another periodical, someone who's they call them trusted, quote unquote. They copied and pasted. They might quote that person. If they don't quote that person, they'll at least borrow some of the language and the assumptions. And then when you read that, you're reading the second and the third, sometimes the fourth, sometimes the fifth hand interpretation of an interpretation of an interpretation of a thing. And the words are not what is. The words are not what is. A conflict is not what's going on. Conflict doesn't portray what's going on. I saw a video in this person, this baby had his leg completely blown off, and you saw this kid crying and shaking, and kid couldn't be more than 3 years old, thrust into this absurd, stupid world with stupid men who do stupid things and then come up with stupid justifications for them, and who are prideful and scared. And they come up with words to be seen on Twitter instead of trying to help us understand, They come up with words to get viral. And they publish half-assed think pieces with buzzwords. You got to hit the appropriate buzzwords as they try to hit the appropriate audiences based on whatever publication they're employed by. Or if they're doing it independently, shrewdly navigating the political space independently, saying what they need to say in order to be safe with Israel and to not criticize. Hedging language. Like I said, avoiding the word genocide. Subtly in every headline, the the assumption is evident about the value of Israeli life, Israeli suffering. But obviously, if you're hosting the perpetrator of the genocide, you make it very clear that Palestinian life has no value. Certainly not by comparison. We're about to hit 2 years into this thing, and I can't even begin to imagine the people that are still alive, that are still figuring this out. They're booby trapping aid. You know, international law requires that occupied governments and occupiers have to provide for the people they're occupying. The reason that international law is written that way, and it's very clear, the reason it's that way is because, as we're seeing, the occupied people have no power. Neither really does the United Nations. Neither really does the International Criminal Court or these other things. There's no teeth or power to be able to uphold something like some of the rulings that they've reached necessarily. You need the world community to be in agreement. And they have no power, so the occupier has to, you create the law in such a way that puts them in a position that they have to either treat the occupied people well, treat them as their own citizens, or leave. You give them two options: either treat the people as good citizens, as their own citizens, or leave. Israel has violated that for such a long time. And our news media in this country has attempted for a very long time to cover that up and to not deal with that in a very serious way. So many years ago, they fired Mark Lamont Hill from CNN in order, there are people who, Noam Chomsky and countless others, public faces who've tried to put Palestine on the map to describe what's going on. People are pushed out of their jobs. But those people were right. Norman Finkelstein lost tenure, I think, at DePaul University. Himself a Jewish person, himself a child of people who were killed in Nazi Germany. He was punished for his advocacy for human rights. What kind of world do you build when you don't speak accurately? What kind of world do you build when everybody is dependent on someone else and that other person is compromised? And that other person is scared. And that other person is incentivized to warp language and to be to hedge language here and there in favor of this and that. So you saw in that, I think, obviously we're in just a very weird place. Israel continues to expand its war and its violence, even as our entire political elite pretend that these are the people we should be rooting for. They violated first off, they initiated a war with Iran. And then when Donald Trump attempted a ceasefire, they violated that ceasefire. And I saw a clip, was it yesterday or this weekend, where Trump comes out of the White House and he goes out into the lawn, and these journalists are off in there, and one of the journalists screams at him, "Iran just broke the ceasefire. Do you still believe that Iran can hold the ceasefire?" And Trump has to say to her, "Israel broke the ceasefire." This is not the first time he's had to do that. I remember back when he was a candidate, they were asking about the genocide and all the questions, and just the tone of the room. The entire room was on the assumption that Hamas was breaking all the ceasefires. Hamas doesn't want peace. They're irrational and they're crazy. They're just killing people for. And I remember Trump had to go, yeah, Bibi Netanyahu is also breaking ceasefires. And what is it about that journalist there that made her say that? Why did she talk about Iran that way? How was she a professional and wasn't able to? Why did the president of the United States have to correct her and give her a more accurate framing for that moment? And I want to say, and I posted this on Facebook, like, the condition is so bad that, like, I don't even know what publication she's from, but without a doubt, they've normalized the condition of warping reality in favor of the government of Israel. They've normalized that so much that she didn't think anything of it. She went out there and she immediately knew that she's going to talk about, what Iran did. And she's going to quietly preserve the idea that Israel is just out here trying their best to get their hostages. They're just a peaceful little civilization trying their best to do their thing. And the truth is that the prior president, Biden, and so many people in those circles, Zionists, that's what they do. They all engage in an agreement of language. They all engage in an agreement that obscures what is. They use euphemism and clever circuitous language in order to describe anything that Israel might have done wrong. When you look at the hundreds of thousands of people that are getting blown up and maimed, and every day new bombings, new killings. We saw early on they were like telling people to go to different safe spaces. This is a safe space. This is a hospital. This is a mosque. And they would blow those places up. More recently, they took over the aid operations, not only killing journalists, killing UN observers, international observers, and they took over aid operations. They killed people from food programs, and they took over the aid operations and turned them into booby traps. So hungry, starving people who are going to try to get food, they set that up where soldiers would then open fire, or tanks would open fire, or they would get killed. What a horrendous, horrible thing. These are things the Nazis couldn't even think about, this kind of stuff. And we're here because of incredible impunity. We're here because of a failure to use language with the care that it deserves, particularly from the people who present themselves and purport themselves to be in the business of truth. And I'm talking specifically about journalists. This is why I harp on journalists. This is why it's a bit of a challenge when I talk about Twitter. People on Twitter are not journalists. Not everybody on Twitter is a journalist. Some of them are purely money-grubbing clowns who are trying to get famous. Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh are just two names that come to my head right off the top, but there's several others. Millions, perhaps, others. Everybody wants to get their little famous tweet out. Why not? But a journalist has a specific role. A journalist claims a specific role. And they are supposed to help us formalize and normalize and have a grounding of language that we can agree on, that we can understand. But instead it's entertainment. That's journalism, what I just described there. Giving accurate language to reality. Entertainment instead is not going to do that. Entertainment uses language, it uses buzzwords, right? It uses language very flippantly. And I think it's very dangerous. Like I said, a lot of the Twitter people are getting their bad buzzwords, the foundation for their discourse, for their sort of third round of analysis they'll be borrowing language from the other guys, the professionals who are using wrong language and are being evasive. And have their own interests, their own financial interests, where they avoid this and that, their own political interests. And so what are you getting? What is reality at the end of the day? Everyone's just creating content, not thinking about that? Sure, some people on Twitter are probably not thinking about that. The journalists, the professional journalists, should be thinking about that. Are they? No. Nope. They're not. They're not. They're still creating content. They're trying to find ways to preserve their own status and their own reputations. Many of them have taken major hits, but some still have some status and reputations, and they're trying to find ways they're navigating certainly at the beginning of this thing, Israel typically has a good command of the narrative. So there's like, they're navigating now that Israel has clearly lost the narrative. The Hasbara isn't working. The claims of being able to label people anti-Semitic and discard them from the discourse, that's not working. It used to work. Now it's not working. So now they have to deal with us. They have to deal with reality through us. Fox News, as absurd as it is, it still has to deal with its audience and the growth of its audience and awareness. The people who used to watch Fox News, they are noticing themselves how absurd the coverage is for international issues like the genocide, how absurd the coverage is for Trump. They don't notice everything, but the more we all elevate our language, the more we all take seriously our role, and find the courage, especially those of us who care about giving language to reality. If we find the courage to speak what we see and what we know, our expertise, our experience, our lived experience from our perspective, contribute that without fear, then everyone has to deal with that. They got to deal with that. They just have to. Or they let themselves slide into oblivion. They find themselves with smaller and smaller segments of the population who still tune in to watch garbage. Buzzwords. Clickbait. Evasive partisan language. Some people want that. There's room for that. But we have to properly call that as entertainment. That's why I said nonfiction is a subgenre of fiction. This journalism space, the cable one in particular, the subgenre of fiction. Until we take seriously our role and get into the language. But I want to go further, yo. It's not just language. It's not just language that we're receiving from the news. It is that. It's not just that. But deeper than that, yo. The world we live in is the product of all these narratives that we've received from the cable news journalists and from all these like experts and these officials and these so-called smart people. The people who pop up on MSNBC to talk about like whatever there's a time, let's say the healthcare gets on is a public issue, some sort of a social service. It becomes a national discourse around that. They always find these experts who pop up with to talk about inflation. Whoa, be careful, inflation. Remember, you can't. Remember. It's like inflation is this buzzword. It's a thought terminating cliche. It's a quick way to say that we can't afford it. Of course, these same inflation people never pop up when it's wartime, when it's time to throw money to war. Never pop up when it's another bill of sending dollars and bombs to Israel. It's never, or to some other place. They only, as you know, with the Doge thing, you know what I'm saying, they go and they attack all these federal workers and these social service programs and initiatives. Small dollar, small ticket items, by the way. The big stuff goes on when it's time to bail out the banks. When it's time to bail out an industry. The banks in particular who run amok and create all these like fancy and risky instruments. They make themselves a bunch of billions of dollars and then they fuck it up and crash. And then who bails them out? The U.S. taxpayer bails them out. And there's no discussion about inflation. No discussion about it. Nope. That's not the time to talk about inflation. You see, because they're controlling language. They bottleneck the discourse. They tell us they're not just using words. There's a subtext to those words, And that's what we want to talk about, That's what there's a subtext to words. Even on this Iran thing, man, like someone was making the argument, as many people are making, that there's no reason to bomb Iran. They were always talking about bombing Iran. Iran is on the agenda for Netanyahu to try to kill more people and to gain more power in the Levant. Leave Iran alone, right? And then people respond, so now you're pro-Iran, huh? I want to point out how goofy that is. When I see someone say, oh, so you're pro-Iran, the other person tends to reply and kind of like, oh, no, I'm not pro-Iran. What I'm saying is, and they come up with this other, that reply about you're pro-Iran, think about an alien who comes to this planet. They won't understand that. They won't understand why that's a reply. There's a subtext about Iran. There's a story that we all have about Iran, about Muslim, about Islam, about fundamentalist Islam, the idea that that's what goes on in Iran, about all these stories about words that mean something in one language and we interpret it completely different. Words like Ayatollah and all these concepts of violence. It's like they use that subtext that we've gotten, that propaganda. They use the movies that we've received about the crazy, screaming, Allahu Akbar Muslim. They use that, and then they don't have to ever really point to it directly. They don't have to say the racist thing again. They simply say, oh, so you're pro-Iran? And this changes your ability to it won't do that to me, by the way. Because it's a stupid reply, but it does a lot of work, even though it's a stupid non-reply. Even if Iran is all those things that you say it is, it doesn't justify bombing it or committing ourselves to a new war in the region. Specifically, it's like, but yet when we have our discourse, that subtext of the Islamophobia does a lot of work and it shuts down our discourse, But worse than just our news sources, it's our everyday conversations, The question is, what world do we live in? What world do we live in? Not just the people in the news, but our entire world, the people we come across. You know what I mean? Like, what is the world we live in? And I'm afraid we live in a country at least, that on the surface likes to talk about freedom and likes to talk about, freedom of speech and all of these things as these virtues and these things that make it special. But at the same time, they're shutting down protesters in universities. They're deporting journalism students for the crime of accurately describing the international scene. They are like, there's an active effort to narrow the world we're in. They are using words and labels like anti-Semitism to make it impossible to critique a nation state, a government, in the middle of a genocide. In this climate, people like Ben Shapiro and his massive platform where he himself, and that they produce, from what I saw, something like 20 million. They used to. In 2023, they have like revenue of 20 million. I don't know what the profit is. I don't know, but revenue of 20 million. He will, he gets on and reaches millions of people and has nothing but justifications and rationales and support, Hasbara, defense for why. Why must Israel bomb Iran? Of course they must. Yes, of course. Why must Israel blow up food aid and kill people who are searching aid? Oh, they must. These terrorists. They're all terrorists. All of them are terrorists. Why would Ben Shapiro call Ta-Nehisi Coates a terrorist, which he did? The problem is that people take that language. They take when you listen to someone who is in a space, if you approach someone and you think, like, if you're watching fiction, that's one thing. But if you go to someone with the sense that you're watching someone tell you genuine things about the real world and you are listening to them, you adopt that language. You adopt their assumptions. Whether you're aware of it or not, you are adopting their assumptions. I mean, that's how this whole thing works. You are adopting their assumptions. You have to be careful about who you're watching. You have to make some serious choices about what words are and what reality is, and to have the discernment to make sure that you are watching people who share your values and who are actually genuinely attempting to talk about reality. They aren't saying things purely for profit. They aren't saying things purely to get clicks. They aren't saying things purely because they have a back end deal. They're being paid on the back end to present something in a certain way. How do we do that? How do you build up that discernment? How do we build up the discernment and the lack of, the intolerance? You need to develop an intolerance for this bullshit. I rarely go on Twitter. I went on Twitter today because I knew it would be some bullshit, and I knew I would have something to talk about for this episode. But discernment means you don't. It's not even, oh yeah, that's over there, and you see it every day, and yeah, I watch CNN because, and I share a CNN link because blah blah. These words are part of a tapestry of what reality appears to be to you. And your engagement with these content creators and these public voices is an endorsement. It is an agreement. You're in agreement with them in ways that might seem irrelevant, but they're actually super relevant. I want to move into this thing called boundaries. I have boundaries in the topic subject line, I think. Boundaries is something really important because we are inundated with so much information. In 2025, we are inundated with so much stuff. You really have to be active in saying no to things. And this is something I've had to work on, yo. Just like on a personal tip, I am not, or haven't been all of my life, someone who's good with boundaries. I grew up being taught with a sense that it's very important to be liked. It's very important to be likable. It's very important to be approachable and be seen as safe. There are good reasons for that. I grew up in Brooklyn. I grew up in Canarsie, Brooklyn, in East New York, and you wanted to stay safe. Then as you get older and you go to school and shit, you want to have a network. You want to have a network of people, and you want to be well employable and well loved. And so you want to stay away from controversy, and you want to just be someone who's amenable to almost all things and everyone at all times. And I fear that I certainly have had to work through that to get to where I am now. And I fear that too few of us do the work to work through that, to work through this like impulse, this learned way of being as palatable and safe to as wide an audience as possible. Because when you're doing that, particularly in a time when things are crazy, you've undermined yourself. This is hard to feel. Like, you only feel what you feel. Like, you feel yourself doing your thing every day. You're not even aware of like what you're not doing. You're not aware of what you could be or who you could be, what you could say. You're only aware of what you say. You kind of know, with boundaries, stay away from religion and politics, and stay away from this and that. This is a wild time. It's not just the news. Yes, I want you to turn off cable news. Yes, I want you to stay away from Twitter. Yes, I want you to go to billybutton.com, go to the media center, and get serious about those sources that I have on the media center. Those are quality sources of who I've vetted that are meaningful journalists and all that stuff. But beyond that, your entire world is contingent on the boundaries you set and the people you let in and the stories you accept. You know what I'm saying? Or something a little less dastardly, a little less dark than a genocide. Or something as simple as dating. I've talked about this a little bit, man. I'm on some chat groups with friends, you know what I'm saying? Friends of mine that I value and respect on some level, dudes that I went to high school with and are cool. On some level, I have a lot of like memories with. But there's also an issue when we chat, when in our circle, in our group, we get together. There are certain members of our group that love to hate women. They love an opportunity to be like, look at this bitch over here, this fucking take a picture of a video of some girl on Instagram and sort of talk about how her body isn't right, or how women don't get married and wives suck, and if only chicks would do this and this and that. Why am I bringing this up? I'm saying that in order for me to operate in that space, I'm agreeing to those things. There are other rooms with just white people who, there's a general agreement about how to talk about black people. Quite often there's an agreement about like how to talk about some group of person or group of people that are not in the room. And you agree on this culture. And you're creating reality. Everyone goes home with a sense of what is. If it's a room that is, heavy in misogyny, everyone gets a sense of what women are. And of course, some women get in rooms and do this stupid shit and come with a false sense of what men are. And they need to get better and stop doing that. But we're all in these different rooms, whether it's a chat room or it's our work environments or in our personal spaces, our friends and families. And I haven't stepped into my boundary setting power so much because I've been trained sort of against it, And I want to point out that, like, for instance, my wife is going through a challenge at the moment where, because of Palestine, her world has been flipped upside down, and she's now navigating, how to move in a world where it's being ever more clear that like we live in an absurd, backwards, upside down world where the media is constantly lying and politicians are lying. And everyone just kind of goes about their business while our tax dollars go and fund this. And what I've had to witness with my wife is that she's going through a major transformation over the last 2 years. And I've witnessed her set some serious boundaries with her friends and with her family. And throughout the process, I've watched and I've challenged her on some of this because it's very foreign to me, and it affects me. When she sets a boundary with her family and says that she doesn't want to see a certain member of the family or to avoid something, that changes how my approach as well. It changes things. We're both being invited to family outings. Sheba has this beautiful family that does stuff and meets up, and when we were first dating, they just have a little house party and everybody just have some beers and laugh and watch a football game. I loved that. I'm a big fan of that. And I'm watching Sheba navigate, what started with her asking her family to take up the cause of Palestine a bit more. She had some specific asks, and certain members of the family were able to abide and others were not. And this situation has continued and grown and gotten more serious, and she's cut off members of her family in a way that I find uncomfortable, in a way that I find myself asking her not to do that. I find myself asking her to be more creative. But she's done it and she continues to do it, and she asserts this thing. I find myself struggling to, like, first of all, I understand her anger. I understand her dismay at the political situation. And what she's doing is she's saying, I live in a world where genocide is not something we ignore. I don't live in a world where we just hem and haw and shrug through it. I live in a world where we use our voice and we try to make things uncomfortable where we are. We try to hold mirrors up, you know. I think it's amazing. I think it's brilliant that my wife is like that. I didn't know that I would have a wife who would be like that. I didn't expect that. So this is a challenge for me, not only because, like I said, I really appreciate her family. I love her family as I love my family, as I love my biological family. But beyond that, like, I did not expect to be married to a woman who could or would, who had that kind of temperament, you know. And so that's been part of the challenge here. I haven't talked about that very much. Sheba talks about it a little bit more in her show, See Like Sheba. You can find it on my on my profile. Follow her. She's asserting the world that she lives in. I fuck with that. That's powerful. That's beautiful. She doesn't just receive. This goes back to everything I'm talking about since the beginning of this episode. You don't just go on Twitter, you don't just watch Fox News or CNN or MSNBC and receive the language that they use, receive that language, and then internalize that language, and then regurgitate that language, and then settle into a normal because they have told you things are normal. Oh yeah, hospitals. Somehow a hospital in Gaza got bombed, and people in their hospital beds who were recovering from the last bombing. Somehow, I don't know why they were bombed before, but now they're in the hospital, and these guys are, they're children in incubators. Somehow the electricity grid was bombed, and children are dying from starvation. Other children had to be left in the hospital because the military, the IOF, went and sieged the hospital and took everyone else. And the news is reporting that there are mass graves. They killed ambulance workers, aid workers, killed them, and then covered it up by crushing the ambulance and the people in the ambulance and burying it in a shallow grave. This is proven fact. This is what happened. Now, do we say, it's all good, and then John Fetterman says whatever, and then Bibi Netanyahu shows up on CNN, and Dan Abash interviews him and says, oh yeah, you're good. You're good because you're not Hamas. You are the Jewish people, and you're good. And these assumptions, and the avoidance of words. You know what I'm saying? Like Zionist, this political campaign, not Jewish, Zionist. Jewish people are at the forefront against this terror campaign, this genocide. This has nothing to do with Judaism. This has nothing to do with Judaism. Don't attempt that. Don't do that. So Sheba's in a place where she is not tolerating a kind of malaise around this. I've seen her cry. We've shed tears together. She has developed a kinship and a friendship with a family out there, Asma, Ibrahim, Tolin. We did a fundraiser for them. Sheba talks to her daily, if not weekly. They definitely text daily, but weekly, get updates about what's going on. They've had to move several times. It's like a family of about 8 that are trying to like navigate this crazy situation that none of us could possibly fathom. And she says, I'm not going to live in a world where we pretend that away. Guess what? That's what we were taught. We were taught that Germans should have not lived in a world, should have done the same thing. She was embodying the spirit of what we learned after World War II about the importance of humanity and the ways that we protect each other and we put things on the table. I can't argue against that. I do think that she should be creative and talk to her mom. I want her to have a relationship with her mom. I want her to figure out something creative with other members of the family too. But the mom in particular, that's what I think. But so that I'm putting this is a fucking long ass episode, but I'm just gonna get it all in. Like, I have this sense that, man, I wish I could find this creative sort of middle approach to it. But I also am like, I admire her ability to stand on who she is and what she knows and to create the world. She said, this is what the world will be. That's something that we all have. We're doing it whether we know it or not. When you follow somebody on Twitter, when you follow them and you like and you agree with the language, when someone on Twitter says that Zohran Mamdani is a jihadist and you like that post, you have agreed with that world. You have created a world where we have to look at Zohran Mamdani as a jihadist. Why would you use that word to describe him? When you go and you take a CNN article and the CNN article takes a very winding and circuitous route to talk about to not describe the destruction of hospital infrastructure, to defend Israel's international crimes. You've agreed to that world. If you avoid the word genocide because, or you avoid talking about Israel altogether because they said that it's anti-Semitic, or because they said that, there's some people who believe that their lives are at stake and their livelihoods and this and that are at stake. Like, you are agreeing to that world. You're agreeing to a world that says that there's a power over you. See, I don't have an anti-Semitic sense that there's this cabal that is in control of me and can cancel me or can tell me how to act and I need to be in accordance, that they have power over me, that they can assert reality for me, that I should discard what I see and what I hear and what I know. I should discard my understanding as a journalist. 5 years at CNN. I should discard my understanding as a Capitol Hill staffer. 5 years on Capitol Hill. I should discard my understanding as a person with graduate level bona fides in international relations and philosophy. Discard all that and simply adopt the language of a conflict. Accept Israel's excuses for why they have to bomb aid and kill children who are searching for food. I don't accept that. The people who are doing that are motivated by whatever they're motivated by. Right? I've talked about this already. Getting clicks, being seen, having the cool hot take, seeking a specific audience. They're looking for a specific audience. They're saying the buzzword that will get that audience to tune in. I have to have discernment to know that there's a layer of phenomena of like the choices behind the words that I'm not going to engage in that. I am going to set the language. I'm going to set the boundaries. So Sheba doesn't receive. She does receive. She's beautiful. She's fantastic. She's femme. She's a beautiful wife. She's fantastic to me. And then she doesn't receive when she doesn't want to receive. She sets. She creates. And I remember I used to argue with her like, a lot of people, when they want to change the world, when they want to set a boundary, they change it. They get mad at a politician. They get mad at a representative or someone over here in political power. I'm like, your family's not, this. She has a different philosophy. She says, well, these are the people I have the most power with, actually. People who write a letter to a congressman, they're not the congressman. I know, I can tell you firsthand, it goes through a whole filter thing and then they send you a form letter and blah, 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 blah. Yes, it's important to do that, but that's not going to meaningfully do much. The congressman himself will never see that letter. It will be one of the staffers who do that. She believes and she's living out the idea that by asserting her world and setting boundaries with people who won't engage in her world on her terms, particularly on this matter, that the world changes. She's certainly changed. I've changed, and the world changes. The relationships change. Things, when before this thing would have been completely outside of everyone's understanding, outside of everyone's consciousness, she represents, like, people will now have to be made to think about these issues because she's done that, It's an interesting theory. It's an interesting approach. I've got to see it firsthand. It's a challenging approach. But it is what it is. And the most powerful part about it, the thing that I want to take from it is the capacity to set one's boundaries, to assert the world that we live in, to not only receive the world from other people as they dictate it and as they assume it, but to set that. And hopefully to do it from love, to not do it the way these guys on Twitter are doing it, to not do it the way the fuckboys on Fox and them are doing it, To see what does it mean to actually be able to set narratives, and to find out what does it mean and what motivates you and who, what drives your lens. So what I've learned in this process is the value and the importance of being able to set our own lens and our own language and to set our boundaries. And I'm going to end this episode off with 3 quick descriptions of 3 former friends that I've had to let go. I've had to let go in this process. I want to share how that happened. I've thought about this for a while, about how to talk about this. And I just have a couple of notes, I guess, but I'm just gonna try to wing this here. And I'm gonna end it off with this. All right, and the whole episode is an all-encompassing conversation about the power of narratives, about the goofy and difficult motivations that so many of us people we have in our narratives. When you go out in the world, you go on the internet, to consider what's happening behind the narratives, the choices, the perspectives, the incentives that are happening behind the narratives, and then to try to bring that back in my life, right? To not only be someone who critiques externally, but to consider, how am I using language, and how am I, what are my motivations and my incentives, and where am I setting reality? So I'm gonna start off with like I said, 3 people. The first one is this dude. Plus that. I'm gonna change the names of people to preserve stuff. Okay. The first person's name is Cross. Okay, Cross is someone that Cross is a coworker at a news company. I would call him a nice guy. Call him a liberal. He was one of the friendliest people to me. There are many friendly people in the news business. He's one of the friendliest people to me. We used to get drinks after work sometimes. We would talk more about politics. He was a liberal, like I said. He was someone who was very, very nervous about Trump getting back in power, back in office. And he's someone who believed in the Democrats and this and that, and he generally believes that he believes in being kind to each other and all these kinds of things. By all extents and purposes, a good person. But when I left a news company in part because of disgust of the product and the ways that we fail truth. You know what I mean? But fast forward 2024, we know that October 7th happens in 2023. October 2023. This is late 2024. It's been weird for me to navigate sort of even these old relationships with people who I know who are still in the news business and stuff. I've been very critical because I feel like we have to be. But I also have people, friends, acquaintances. When I left, people were like, "Yeah, we'll connect. We'll get you some jobs. I got some work for you and this and that." And, in my mind, you want to kind of hold on to those things. You want to be careful. Like I said, I was raised, you want to have a network and you don't want to offend or burn any bridges and all that stuff. But we're now a year into a genocide, and CNN's coverage continues to be bad over and over and over. The headlines are mealy-mouthed and confusing. A lot of effort. I'm someone who's paying attention to language as a media analyst, and I was bothered more and more by the product on television, and knowing the heinous violence that's occurring. And I tell you that the failure to call things accurately from the beginning is why Benjamin Netanyahu gets to run around. It's why people like all these guys in Congress, why they get to say the things they say. It's very confusing. If you're not grounded in a reality, you can get the sense that Israel is doing a good thing, that Israel is worthy of our support, that they're fighting just a whole country full of baby terrorists, and if the whole logic to justify heinous actions. And so one day, I decided I was going to message Cross. And I'm not going to read this whole thing because there's a go back and forth and it's a little nutty. But I message him and I say, first I ask him about life, and he's working on some projects that I remember from back in the day, And then I say, "Yo, are CNN employees doing anything to prevent this terrible war coverage, this war hawking coverage and narratives that would be judged very poorly in years to come?" Did I read that weird? I'm asking, are people in the building doing anything to improve the coverage, to challenge the decision makers in there, to improve the coverage so that we stop the genocide? That got ignored. He ignored that. A couple of days later, no, not days later. That was 5 months later. I write again. "What up, Cross? What's new, yo? How you doing?" Ignored me. So I say, "Yo, are you ignoring me?" And then he messages. And then he called me. And he asked that we do a call. So we did a call. We actually did a phone call. And I remember it was kind of a cordial call at first, and then we got off and we went back on text. And this goes back and forth. It's a little bit long, but the point is, the initial thing, Cross starts to tell me that he doesn't watch the TV product. He doesn't watch the TV product. And further, the work he's been doing is more of the domestic stuff. He's not really into the international stuff. He hasn't, he hasn't done any of those pieces. So this is his response. As I'm asking him, will there be an effort to improve the coverage? He's simply saying, "Yo, I'm not a part of that." And of course, he is a part of it. He works in the building. So we go back and forth, and he doesn't watch. He says, "Oh, he's only involved in domestic." And then eventually, as we go back and forth, he says to me, "Yo, are you suggesting that I'm complicit in a genocide?" And it's funny that he says that, right? He produced it. I didn't go that far, frankly. I was asking questions about CNN. I tried to make it as broad and general as possible, that there was something that needed to be done generally between the editors and the producers and the people of conscience, and the journalists need to do something. So he says, "Yo, are you suggesting that I'm complicit in a genocide?" And I reply, "Yes, we are all complicit. We're all complicit in different ways. Some of us more than others. right? I knew he wouldn't like that. And I thought about it for a second before I typed it and before I pressed send, but I had to press send. And so I did. And then he became really angry. He started calling it BS. He started saying that, the coverage is not one-sided. He started having examples of things that are not one-sided. Here's an example. He sent me a link of like these different articles that seemed to portray Palestinian suffering a bit more in these articles. And I just, we go back and I challenge him that these articles aren't enough because first off, the article is one thing, but the majority of people who watch, who engage with this news product, they engage with the television product. And the television product is 24 hours, panels of Zionists who are all agreeing on a set of language, using euphemism and tacitly supporting Israel. He goes back and forth. He's like, I don't think that's true. I won't let that slide. He just defends wholeheartedly the stuff. Then he gets angry. He starts to get angry. He says that the coverage is nuanced. I think you're being self-righteous and dishonest. You're standing on a soapbox. And he said, your hubris is unbelievable, is what he says to me. I need to step back. And he says also, you need to consider how you engage with people that you once called friends. He immediately challenged our friendship, and just became very defensive. And he says, okay, and then so it ended with him saying, okay, look, you know what, I'm going to leave it here. Our conversations are no longer enjoyable. He says, you're talking at me, not engaging with me. And so I had to say, okay, cool. Take care. Just leave it at that. And I felt like that sucked for a little bit because, again, this isn't some crazy, terrible, right-wing racist or some Zionist who. It's just a guy who works at a place and who doesn't really want to deal with the complexity of that, But that's what is. That's the challenging thing here. That's the challenging thing. That's what is. What is incorporates the whole deal. It incorporates not just the words on the screen. It incorporates the phenomena behind it. It incorporates the people who are making the decisions and the people who press the buttons and get things on the screen. And the world that we have is the world that is the product of people quietly choosing to do the things that they do. Quietly choosing the vernacular that they choose. Avoiding this, speaking up about that. And of course there are people manipulating that. There are people making it difficult to talk about certain things. But I tried my best to talk to Cross directly and to challenge him to approach things differently, to see things differently. And he said it wasn't enjoyable, and he defended his work, and he said that we need to part ways. So that's what we did, and I'm cool with that. And that was something I had to do. I feel like it was the right thing to do. I feel like it's weird to engage in these relationships that aren't meaningful, that don't get into things, that we just kind of wink and nod and shrug and avoid the sticky, juicy stuff that is. That's how we get into these weird, stupid places. Because we're not grounded in the same truth about what is. That was one. The second person is a guy, we'll call him Keegan. Keegan is a dude from high school. I know him from Brooklyn Tech in high school. It's a black dude. And we've always disagreed. He's a political person, but he doesn't call himself that. It's funny. He's an Ayn Rand person. Anyone who knows Ayn Rand, Ayn Rand is an objectivist. It's a philosophy that believes in the most open and freest form of capitalism. They are highly opposed to any forms of organization or political organization in particular, government, opposed to income tax, opposed to taxation for roads, and opposed, everything can be done privately, truly everything. There are some people who believe that most things can be done privately. You might call them libertarians and things like this. But an objectivist holds as a philosophy that everything can be done privately. Private fire stations and private schools and private everything. And so we'd get into these debates because I disagree entirely with that. And we've gone back and forth, and we'd meet up and have great conversations, and you have a drink and debate and argue, and some of it would be very interesting. We've done that for years. And so now, boom, October 2023 happens. And somewhere along the line, I started to ask him questions about Israel and Palestine. And I asked him what he thinks about what's going on, and the global ramifications and this and that. And I started to also talk about the media and the sort of the discourse as I'm doing today. And he replied that, I don't give a fuck about no Palestinian. That was his first reply. His first reply was, I don't give a fuck about no Palestinian. And I didn't like that. So I told him I didn't like that. He continued to say, I don't give a fuck about Palestine. What I care about is my career. I got a career. I got to do my thing. See, part of that philosophy, it's about hyper-individualism. It's about it's not just all about economic theory. It's also about it's anti-empathy. The root of these theories are the same root that you might find Elon Musk and these guys. That's why he was anti-empathy. They believe that any sort of government initiative and social programs, these are the road to hell is good intentions. You're taking money from rich people and trying to give it to people, to poor people. So his philosophy is entirely about being self-sufficient and looking out for oneself. Holy. Selfishness as a virtue, even. This is the philosophy. So he says, I don't care damn about Palestinian, I forget exactly how that conversation ended, but, and this convo has been erased somehow on the WhatsApp, so I can't even reference it. But, so that conversation passed. And then when Trump came into office the second time, so early in January, you'll remember that they had a joint meeting between Trump and Netanyahu, and Trump endorsed a plan to ethnically cleanse Gaza. He was talking about real estate and the whole deal. It was just a lot of people were blown away by this, if you remember. People thought that he was the potentially a peace candidate. Most of us knew better than that. But here he was standing alongside Netanyahu and agreeing that the best way forward is to cleanse Gaza. And so then this time Keegan comes to me, right? Keegan comes to me and sends me the article about this, and he says, isn't this the best plan? Don't you agree they should cleanse Gaza? And I'm like, no. How could this possibly be the best plan? And he's like, this will save the most lives. If Egypt will take a few, and blah, 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 and Syria can take some, and then Israel can have their land, and then everybody can be peaceful. I'm like, what are you talking? So we have this whole thing back and forth about, first off, wouldn't that be rewarding terrorist behavior? They've killed 50, 60,000 plus people, and you now think that the best way to reconcile all this is to give Netanyahu exactly what he wants? Does that make any sense? He goes back and forth, and we get into this whole thing, and he tells me that nothing Israel is doing in Gaza is wrong. He says they need to finish the job. He says they probably need to do it quicker. And he justified it by saying this. He said that 1,200 Israelis were killed on October 7th. And then he took that and he said, if you take that per capita and take that number, that amount, and put it to the Israeli population, and you take the size of Israel into account, that attack was 3 times 9/11. And so our response to 9/11, Israel has a right to do that whole response to 9/11 and da-da-da. And he does this whole math equation. And as I was reading it, it was just pissing me off. I think in particular, I just finished reading some really horrible thing and just finished being updated on the atrocities, and to hear him simplify things down to an equation like this and to say, well, the best way to do this is to give the most right-wing racist Israelis, Netanyahu, exactly what they want. Everybody should just leave. That would solve it. So I'm like, that's not only is that number of people that were killed on that day, fully a third of those people were killed by Israel. So if you take that math equation and you think about 9/11, does it, like, that whole thing is wrong. A third of them were killed by Israel that day. So if that were true on 9/11, how would you think about the US? How would you think about the United States when you learn that if they had killed a third of the casualties on 9/11, not from the planes, not from whatever, but that the US government came and started bombing the site, creating more havoc and killing their own people? How would you feel about them? And then further, I think it's disgusting that you would say nothing that goes on in Gaza is wrong. That's a quote. Nothing they're doing in Gaza is wrong. I said, I think it's disgusting, and I think you're a clown. And I don't have any respect for you and your opinion. Because again, I know that his opinion is rooted in his own self-interest. His whole world, the objectivist world, the work he's doing right now is he's a university person, by the way. He's around lots of Zionists, and he aspires to be around other Zionists, and he doesn't want to be in a position to have to critique Israel in any way, and so he doesn't. So first he tells me he doesn't give a shit about Palestinians, and then months later, he comes and endorses Netanyahu's plan for ethnic cleansing and apologizes and supports everything that's happening in Gaza, and he says he does it because of this math equation, which is false. The numbers are all stupid and wrong. And that got me so angry, And I just think it's disgusting. And so I said, we shouldn't communicate any longer. I just don't have the energy for this. The debates aren't grounded in reality. They're grounded in your fears. They're grounded in your stuff. You're bringing that to this. Like, I'm trying to articulate what is and to chart a path forward about what is, and you are concerned with preserving attachments to your colleagues, right? And your colleagues have irrational attachments, and you don't want to question that. You're looking to preserve networks, And so we had to move forward. So I'm not friends with that person. I think their worldview is disgusting. But if you take a serious look at what's going on in Gaza, you don't come to that conclusion. You just can't. That everything Israel is doing, that they're not doing anything wrong. And I realize that he has to come to these clear-cut conclusions too. Clear. They're not doing anything wrong. Clear. Because to inject even the slightest amount of doubt would unravel the whole thing. To look closely at what it is and to properly place what Israel is doing, what Netanyahu's doing, unravels the entire thing. You would have to critique the whole thing, and he doesn't want any of that. He would have to really look at his colleagues differently. They've all agreed on a language. They've agreed on the idea that the most moral army, America's greatest ally, all this stuff. So that's the second friend I'm no longer friends with. And I'm gonna close out this episode with the last friend. The last friend is actually, we're gonna call him Bobo. And Bobo is another high school friend, and this person is actually a Jewish person. It's a Jewish friend of mine that I've known for a long time, since high school. I've known him since like sophomore year of high school. Bolo is what we're calling him. And this conversation sucked. But it had to happen, and then we had to keep it moving. He's a Jewish Ukrainian, And Bolo is someone that I used to, I've talked about this story where I would walk past, we'd walk on the way to school, we take the train, we take a bus and then 2 trains to Brooklyn Tech. And sometimes we'd walk past these these black Israelites, and they would have all this stuff and very, invective about white people and like invective about Jewish people. And they'd see us walking and I remember like getting into arguments with them, as they were like, they would pick on, Boris would just be walking by, they'd pick on him, Bolo, so this is why I've always been I'm actually someone who's very attuned to the concern about anti-Semitism. I know that anti-Semitism is a real thing. It's another irrational racism, and it's dangerous, and I hate it, and I'm not a fan of it. So I don't come at this lightly. I never did, All of my work demonstrates that. And so here, after October 7th, 2023, I was cautious. I knew that dude has some family and relationships in Israel. I don't know the extent, but I was cautious. I stayed away from him for a while. And then about 6 months in, I messaged him. I said, 6 months in, what's your opinion of this ethnic cleansing happening in Palestine? Right? And he says to me, Billy, in the interest of our friendship, I'm going to not engage with that question. I have family in the region. I have a 19-year-old nephew who's in Gaza. Just know that I struggle with most of what you post, and I choose to just swipe past it. I'm sad for the people in Gaza. I'm sad for the people in Israel. Everyone is hurting. But at this point, I will continue to side with my own people. So I reply, okay, based on your loved ones there, we both probably agree that war and violence should stop. I'm for a ceasefire immediately. I know your people aren't a monolith on this, and there are many facets. When you say your people, are you talking about the Israeli government? He replies, the Jewish people. So again, right off the bat, in the interest of our friendship, I'm not going to engage in this question. So very, very early on, there's a clear boundary being set. He's letting me know our friendship is at risk if you continue down this line of questioning, So I say, I'm not trying to risk our friendship. I don't even know why that's at risk, to be honest. I know several Jews who've been calling for a ceasefire. So I'm trying to ascertain where you are, bro. He ignored me. He ignored me for a couple of days, and I decided, though, as things kept warming up, things kept getting crazier and crazier and crazier. And my understanding of international law, my understanding of, this condition, things have gotten crazier. Iran, this thing with Iran continues to expand. So, I decided I'm going to press forward with my friend that I've known for fucking 20 plus years or something. I'm going to have this conversation because we're adults and we can have it. And I'm actually interested in his opinion. I'm actually interested in us being able to ascertain truth together. Actually, especially as someone who's interested in discourse and language, I also think it's possible for us to agree on a set of things. What are those things? Let's get into it. Let's not sort of vaguely, generally have a sense of something. Let's get into what is together, So I said, he ignored me. I said, is this thing still on? I said, Boris, man to man, why would you let Netanyahu corrupt and cloak himself in the Jewish faith this way? When you say the Jewish people, that's a thing. That's not Netanyahu. That's not Ben Gvir and Smotrich. That's not the West Bank settlers. Is it? Actually, let's find out. Let's talk about it, my friend. He says, thanks for stopping by. I'm doing well. Glad you are too. Best wishes for your continued success in life. So then I go, man, this is really odd behavior, man. I know we don't communicate often, but the last time I checked in with you, you warned me to avoid this topic at the risk of our friendship. These are real things going on in the world, and I don't understand this behavior. You never replied to my last message. I said, best of wishes to you too. So then he has a long thing here, which I don't want to read the whole thing. But he says, this hits closer to home for me than it does for you. I have aunts, uncles, and nephews there. And he says, I'm trying to preserve our friendship. I don't know why you're pressing when I asked you not to. He says, I can tell you, Billy, that your posts are deeply hurtful and you're fueling anti-Semitism. And then he says, there are more attacks on Jews happening all over the world than ever before. Look at Amsterdam just a few weeks ago. I was in Netherlands that week reading that there was an organized pogrom just an hour from where I was. So I'll ask you this time to stop with the questions. We can remain friends so long as our interactions are based on pleasantries, not politics. This is a quote. Pleasantries, not politics. This is a friend that I've had for 20 years. And I'm a 42-year-old man. He's a 42-year-old man. And he uses the word pleasantries. He tells me that those are the terms that he wants to deal with, not politics. Well, I don't call it politics. I call it reality. Politics is reality. You know, these things are real. If there was a program, that's not a good thing. We should be able to talk about that. But it just so happened that the pogrom that he was talking about, the thing that he was talking about was a well-known not pogrom, right? This was something in Amsterdam at the time that it was a sporting event where these Israeli sports fans, one of the most racist sports teams in Europe and in that part of the world, they had a sporting event and there was this whole brouhaha, and the Israeli fans were going around and like vandalizing and screaming things and talking about killing Arabs and stuff like this. And then some of them got beat up. And some parts of the media, the Israeli media, some of the Zionist media, took that story and started using the word pogrom. And started using it as a rallying cry to say that Jews are being persecuted. Look at this again. Started to craft a narrative. He picked in his thing to tell me that he doesn't want to talk to me about serious topics. He picks this one thing about himself and his people being victimized, but it wasn't real. And I just happen to know that it wasn't real because I'm actually someone who is seriously looking at this thing, and I'm invested in not just the crimes happening in the Levant, but also in the media narratives that are happening in all the different worlds and the way that this all plays out. So I actually sent him an article that talked about it in particular and reframed it. An article that was done by Breaking Points. But there are several articles where the mayor herself from Amsterdam, the mayor who, when they were first interviewed about it, they went along with the word pogrom, and then the mayor went back and retracted that word. He went back and said, no, this was about hooligans from that Israeli team who were starting trouble and then got confronted. And so I said, I replied to him with a link to the article showing that it was just about hooligans. So I challenged the pogrom notion. And I said, I need my relationships to be based on a shared reality. This is not politics. This is real life. So I sent the article, like I said, and I said, this was not a pogrom in Amsterdam. These were hooligans behaving badly. It seems that you're getting horribly biased information. This is why it's important that people communicate. This underscores why it's important that we communicate. Whatever your news sources are, they are feeding you information that desires to keep you trapped in a sense of this victimhood narrative, of this pogrom that didn't happen. Here's the proof. From love. Can we talk about this? He says, if that's not possible, so then I go, this is why it's important that people communicate. The world needs honesty and clarity. If that's not possible for you, ellipses, if you prefer empty pleasantries, that's not the kind of relationship that I have. That's not the relationships that I engage in. It's not worth it. Pleasantries. What are you talking about? What are we, 9? You just talk about video games or something? If this thing matters so much to him, which he claims it does matter, his family's all over there. People, there's an expanding war. We want things. He doesn't want to talk about it. So he says, his reply was, it's been a fun 25 years of friendship, but I think your actions of not respecting my wishes are a cause for a pause. It pains me to write this, but let's pick up at some point. And I go, I don't know about picking up at some point, man. My friendships exist on a plane of common reality. You insist in pleasantries, and I think that that's wild. I'm a professional media analyst, by the way. I'm a professional in the field of linguistics and media analysis. And so I'm an expert on propaganda and linguistics and identity. This is actually something I'm very passionate about. I've come to learn that this is my life work, and it's a pivotal moment for everyone right now. And in this thread, you just cited a debunked story, and which underscores the need for us to communicate. Friend, are we not friends? No, we're just people who share pleasantries. So I said, I've always been someone who wanted truth. Maybe one day you'll consider how it's possible that we can have a functioning world with people who simply engage in pleasantries. You can't have a functioning world. What happens is that the violent, aggressive people, they are doing things, they are moving, they are acting. And I don't care what your label is, Jewish, black, white, Nigerian, I don't care what your nationality is, your religion, or your ethnicity. We need to be interested in a common truth together. To me, that's so obvious. And to see this pushback and his desire to not be friends, cool. Cool. Obviously, I pushed the conversation with the sense that we're either going to have this conversation or he's going to do it just like the other two people I mentioned. And so that's what we are. I said, peace, take care. I had to set that boundary. And I think in all three cases, on a level that we don't really perceive, that it's a bit hard to explain, something in the realm of like psychology, maybe in something spiritual, there's something about not just like I said, being active and not just receiving language from Fox News, not just receiving language from Twitter, not just receiving friendships and acquaintances with, this vague malaise of sort of a pleasantries and like not dealing in reality. That produces craziness. That produces where we are right now. There should be no fear around reality and truth. It can be difficult, especially when we're attached to things. But reality begs us to detach. Reality pulls us away from our attachments. That's what it does. So the fact that he would challenge our friendship at the very first thing, and then he would assert himself as like, I'm in support of my Jewish people. That's the first way that they divide us. That's the beginnings of how they make it so that we can't speak. That he's attached to this identity grouping and won't be able to engage in a conversation about what is. Not interested in it. Doesn't want to do it. He prefers those narratives. He prefers the story about the pogrom. True or not, he prefers it because that plays into what he wants it to play into. And he's got a whole support group of other people who agree. He doesn't want to have to challenge that. He doesn't want to have to be in the mode of having to challenge or grow or accept or be active. I just can't do that. I can't do that. And I really wanted to get on here. This is a 2-hour episode. My goodness. But I got a lot in from Zohran to all the way through. And I think this is a common thread here about the ways language can get away from us. Narratives can get away from us. Narratives inherently, they are sort of every word is a low resolution facsimile about like something bigger. We are pointing to something more complex. So, when I say Israel, I'm pointing to a nation state. When he says Israel, he's pointing to a nation state and his ethnicity. I don't believe he's religious like that. So, if somebody else is thinking about a religious thing, people are thinking about all of these different things. And, same with every word, genocide, war, black, white, America, you know, conflict, peace, law, justice, truth. How do we get there? We have to discard bad actors. We have to discard disingenuous contributions to the discourse. We have to discard like hacks and clowns who are trying to create discord and division. We have to become serious about truth. We have to be mindful about our language. And we have to set boundaries, not just in the information we receive, but generally in our world. It's not just in the apps. It's in the peer groups and our assumptions. We want to understand truth together. I'm interested in that. Not everybody is. Not everybody is. And there's lots of reasons for that. Lots of different reasons. The 3 friends I mentioned have 3, I think, different reasons for why, a genuine and thorough conversation about these things became untenable for them, And I actually understand some of it. I know when I was in that building of CNN, it's for me, I just had a grounding in a different background where, I knew I couldn't continue with that. So I'm gonna wrap it up there, man. I'm gonna do some of these comments real quick from Sheba and a couple other people here. Sheba says, this was from earlier, and he ran on popular stances that the average New Yorker likes rather than what the oligarchs want. Sheba says the Intifada has definitely been globalized. Rush Classy says, hi, your channel just popped up on my recommend. Do you think they'll try to highlight that he's a Shia Muslim to try to attack him, given everything that's happened with Iran, Shia the last few weeks? Of course. Few people even know the difference between these different sects and what they mean and why they splintered off. These sects of the Islamic faith have splintered off, just as the Christian faith have splintered off in multiple sects, and they have different approaches to the text that they read, and they have different leadership and all of that stuff. And of course, they will use that to discredit him. They are using that. They've called him I saw several people calling him a jihadist. Embarrassing, disgusting. Sheba says it's so wild. Everything we learned as kids was a lie. It's only us with power. She says, oh my God, you have to see what Trump just posted about Netanyahu. It's the most evil, barbaric thing we've ever seen. What? I have even more beautiful, supportive, and aligned family now ever since releasing the people who are out of line, Sheba says. She says, this episode has been powerful. Yes! I love that. I gotta watch this later. He's got a guilty conscience. She says, your life is going to get so much better now that you let those losers go. I mean, it has been. It has been. Letting go of losers is one thing. Becoming comfortable with myself. Knowing that I am the creator of the reality that I don't have to receive. People in my orbit have to contend with my understanding. I don't simply have to contend with everyone else's and try my best to comport and try to maintain relationships just to maintain them, even as we're in completely different worlds. And it's absurd. And I've been proven right. And I'm going to continue to be proven right because Netanyahu and those guys are crazy. And they're driven by the worst impulses. And every step as they continue to expand the war and to assault and undermine free speech in America, it'll be very clear. This is the most documented genocide ever. So I just find it nutty that the 3 people I talked about in particular just now, each of them wanted to defend their positions and get angrily, opposed to what I was saying. I just think I'm going to win, obviously. Sheba says, man, and white people slogan pleasantries over politics. That's crazy, right? We've been friends for 20 plus years. Pleasantries, not politics. Pause. Ooh, no, that loser's friendship is worth less than doo-doo emoji. All right, yo, that's it. Thank you, baby. Yes, I agree with everything you said. you go hardest with the language. Some of these people, I think it's a shame, so words like loser, I might pause before using that, you know what I'm saying? But I do think it's these positions are terrible, and we're all being tested. Let me end with this, yo. I think we're all being tested. I think I've gone through a crazy set of tests over the last couple of years. Someone who had reached sort of like this pinnacle position for me as an editor, animator, being well sought after in a place that is really well respected and really well compensated, and then the world just thrust you into a position where you have to look at yourself and go, is this something you could do? Can you do this? Like, you thought this was a good place? Can you rock on with this? And it tested me to have to leave and now to find my voice and to create the art that I've been able to create. And I feel like everyone's going through these tests. It's funny, I look at Van Jones. Van Jones had to come out recently, and he ended up being pro-Iran war, pro-bombing Iran, and he goes on CNN to articulate his reasons. And the Iranian government isn't normal. And I just look at a man who's gone through tests and has made very different choices. The tests about what to do. He knows better. He knows about the Netanyahu government. This is an intelligent man. But he's choosing based on his assessment of safety and his network and his income and access, and he's choosing. But everything is so nutty because the frameworks that we were raised into were not real. They were simply a framework of a window, a post-World War II window where, reality was framed in a very specific way. And we've reached the fringe edges of that, where reality doesn't work that way. We are now being tasked with recombining the fractured reality back into something new that we have. We are not receiving this moment. We are creating this moment. We are tasked with creating this moment. This is not the moment for pleasantries. You feel me? And so I'll end it with that, yo. Applause for that. That's just how I see it, man. I appreciate this episode. Check us out on Hot Mic every Sunday. I might start doing this more often, so I don't have to do these like 2-hour episodes. I can just kind of do it more regularly, and check me out for some more music as well, yo. I'm gonna end this off with my most recent joint. I heard it at the beginning, and here it is again. Leave Me Alone. That's it, yo. Thanks a lot, yo. That's how I see it, yo. Applause. Oh, yeah. Perfect. Peace.
I don't care who the greatest. I just be ripping stages. I hope that your mind expand on what's possible when you play this. Hope that you choose your favorite. Trust on your path, you gon' have to prove your patience. My story's sacred, I move through the pages. Every time I look in the mirror, I see the man that I always hoped I would be when I'm grown. Every time that I trust in my intuition, I feel it pulling closer like a king to his throne. Why don't you leave me alone? Leave me alone. Just leave me alone. Leave me alone. Oh, now they talking like everybody talking like. So what they talking about? Huh? It's giving big bang energy. Y'all not my level, I got no enemies. Used to worry about penalties. Flip the story, I've been at ease. Old definitions, I set them free. Now I'm living to better me. Propaganda's unsettling, and my pen is the remedy. Yeah. And every time I look in the mirror, I see the man that I always hoped I would be when I'm grown. Every time that I trust in my intuition, I feel it pulling